The boardroom on the 90th floor had floor-to-ceiling windows. From up there, the city looked tiny. I had built my career staring at that view, telling myself his dream was safe. That morning, something felt wrong the moment I walked in. The board members, men I had known since I was a little girl on my father's knee, would not meet my eyes. Then my ex-husband, Dorian, walked in wearing his best gray suit. He slid a thick brown dossier toward Chairman Eldrick Voss. "Gentlemen," Dorian said, voice smooth and sad like a man performing grief, "Lyra has been selling our satellite encryption codes to foreign rivals." I stood so fast my chair scraped the floor. "That is a lie." No one looked at me. Eldrick opened the dossier. Fake evidence, neatly arranged. The gavel came down hard. "Lyra Thorne, you are stripped of your CEO title. Your family name is removed from this building. You are exiled from Vanguard effective immediately." Security appeared at the door. As they walked me out, Dorian leaned close and whispered, "I didn't just take the company, Lyra. I took your father's original blueprints from the vault this morning." The elevator doors closed. I stared at my reflection in the polished steel and thought, he has no idea what he just started. It was raining by the time I reached the street. Heavy, cold rain that soaked through my blazer in seconds. I pressed the fob for my company car. Nothing happened. The driver sat in the running vehicle and shook his head, then locked the door. Dorian had remotely shut off my clearance before I even reached the ground floor. I opened my banking app. Every account had a red banner, "Under investigation, access suspended." My name was still on the building I had just been dragged out of, and I could not afford a bus ticket home. People with umbrellas passed without slowing down. I opened my handbag searching for anything useful. My fingers touched a small folded piece of paper I had never seen before. The handwriting was shaky but warm and familiar. It belonged to Norris, my father's old gardener, who had worked at the family estate for 30 years. He had slipped it into my bag at last week's charity event. It said, "The roots go deeper than the skyscraper, Lyra. Go to the greenhouse." I read it twice. Then I folded it carefully and put it close to my chest. I started walking. I had nowhere else to go, and right now that felt like exactly the right place to start. My father's old estate was 40 minutes outside the city. I paid a cab with cash kept folded inside my shoe, a habit my father taught me, never be fully at someone else's mercy. The estate looked tired, the gate rusted, no one inside since father died 2 years ago. But I was not going to the house. The greenhouse sat at the back. A glass structure the size of a small chapel, filled with the ghosts of roses my father tended on Sunday mornings. The wooden floorboards were warped from moisture. I went to the far corner, to the board that had always squeaked, the one father used to tap his foot on when deep in thought. I pried it up with a rusted garden trowel hanging on the wall. Underneath was a sealed tin box. Inside was a vintage mechanical typewriter wrapped in oilskin cloth, and beneath it, a stack of punch cards. The kind engineers used in the early days of computers. I turned one over. The pattern of holes was not random. It was code. Written on the inside lid of the tin, in my father's handwriting, were 3 words, "Kill switch." Satellites. My hands went completely still. My father had known something terrible was coming and had spent years quietly preparing. While I knelt in the greenhouse mud, Dorian was holding a press conference at Vanguard headquarters. I found out from a news alert on my cheap phone. He stood at the walnut podium my father had built and told the world he had discovered a revolutionary clean energy source inside Vanguard's research files. He called himself a visionary. He thanked the board for their courage. He cried real-looking tears. Cameras flashed. I watched the stream on my small screen with a tight jaw. Then, about 3 minutes into his speech, the lights in Vanguard Tower flickered. Every single one. The whole building went dark for exactly 10 seconds. The crowd gasped. Dorian gripped the podium. 10 seconds later, the lights returned. But the screens did not return to normal. Every digital display in the building, every monitor, every LED panel, every street-facing billboard, showed one word in white letters on a black background. Thief. It stayed for 30 seconds. Then it was gone. Dorian laughed it off as a glitch, but the cameras had already captured it and the video spread everywhere. I had not done it. Not yet. I put the punch cards back in the tin, wrapped it in my blazer, and thought carefully about my next move. I needed to understand what I was dealing with. That night I went to the victory party Dorian was hosting at our old shared penthouse. I wore a gray scarf and kept my head down. The woman standing in my kitchen, wearing my silk robe and directing the caterers, was Cassandra Ford. Cassandra had been on the elite board. She had been the loudest voice against me in that boardroom, slamming her hand on the table and calling my supposed crimes a betrayal of everything the company stood for. Now she was rearranging my fruit bowl like she owned the place. Because she did. She had been living there for at least a month, judging by the photos already on the walls. I stepped back into the hallway. Then Dorian appeared behind her. The way he touched her shoulder told me everything. This had not happened after our divorce. It had been happening before it. I was still processing that when Cassandra turned and saw me. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Then she smiled, slow and practiced. "You should go, Lyra. This chapter is over for you." She rested her hand lightly on her stomach. And Dorian said very quietly, "I finally have a real legacy to protect." I turned and walked out without a word. I did not sleep that night. I sat in a small rented room, borrowed money from my cousin Petra, and wrote down everything I knew. Every name, every date, every detail. By morning I had a list of people Dorian had hurt before me. One name stood out, Weston Briggs, the former CFO of Vanguard, pushed out 8 months ago for so-called performance issues. I found him in a trailer park on the east side. When I told him who I was, he tried to close the door. I put my hand against it. "He fired you to keep you quiet," I said. Weston opened the door. Over instant coffee and chipped mugs, he told me the clean energy patent wasn't just stolen, it was the centerpiece of a massive insurance scam. Dorian had insured it for $300 million and planned a fake destruction event to collect. But there was worse. Weston reached under his mattress and pulled out a small recorder. He pressed play. Dorian's voice filled the small trailer. "Aldrich, I took care of the old man. The inheritance timeline just got a lot shorter." Weston pressed stop and watched my face. He said nothing. He already knew what it meant. I could not breathe after hearing that. I sat very still. I took care of the old man. My father. My father, who died 2 years ago of what every doctor called a sudden heart attack. He had been healthy, 5 miles every morning, ate well, no history of heart trouble. But I had been too deep in grief to question anything. I had signed every paper they put in front of me. Now I drove to the cemetery outside the city. I sat by my father's grave quietly. Then I noticed the soil. A patch near the base of the headstone had been disturbed recently. The grass was flattened unevenly and the earth was slightly raised. I borrowed a small trowel from a groundskeeper and dug carefully, a few inches down. My fingers hit something hard. A waterproof metal box. Inside was a folded medical report in a sealed plastic sleeve, dated 14 months before my father died. It described the presence of a rare compound in his blood work, one that accumulated slowly in the body and mimicked natural heart failure perfectly. It was not a heart attack. My father had been poisoned. I sat in the grass for a long time. Then I stood up. Grief wants you to stop moving. But I had learned something about myself that week. I was my father's daughter, and he never stopped moving. I rented a basement room beneath a laundromat in the south of the city. The owner, Billy, asked no questions as long as I kept the space tidy. I brought in a folding table, 2 second-hand laptops, and a whiteboard. Then I went looking for people Dorian had thrown away. I found 3 quickly. Nadia, 24, had been a junior data analyst fired for flagging unusual financial transfers. She said yes before I finished asking. Felix, 26, was a network engineer let go the day after finding routing irregularities in the satellite system. He arrived with his own hard drive. Zoe, 23, was a legal intern fired for asking questions about a shell company structure during a routine review. She brought printed documents she had quietly kept. Within 48 hours, Felix found a back channel into Vanguard's server through a gap Dorian's team had never closed. What we found inside stopped all 3 of them mid-sentence. The clean energy patent had already been sold to a shell company in the Cayman Islands 6 weeks before Dorian's press conference where he claimed he had just discovered it. The shell company had no public face, no website, no directors, no press mentions. But it had a physical address, a small office building 3 blocks from the Cayman harbor. I booked a flight using Petra's name through a cash travel agent. At the airport I wore glasses and kept my hair tied back. Nadia stayed behind to monitor the servers. Felix kept the back channel open. Zoe cross-referenced the financial filings. I arrived on a Tuesday morning when the air was thick with salt and heat. I found the building and sat at a cafe across the street for 2 hours, watching the front door. I expected a foreign agent in a sharp suit. I was not prepared for a woman in her 60s. Silver-haired, walking with a slight limp, wearing a plain blue dress and carrying a canvas shopping bag. She unlocked the office door herself and went inside. I sat very still. My heart was loud in my ears. I had seen photos of this woman, old ones, from before I married Dorian. She appeared in exactly 2 family pictures before he told me she had died of illness a decade ago. It was Dorian's mother, Vivian Reed. The woman who was supposed to be dead, walking calmly into a shell company office. I followed Vivian until she sat alone at a small table outside a harbor bakery. I approached slowly and sat across from her. Her eyes recognized nothing at first. Then they did. She set her coffee cup down very gently. "You're Lyra," she said. Her voice was quiet and tired, like someone who had held a secret so long it had worn grooves into her. "Yes," I said. "And you're supposed to be dead." She didn't argue. She looked at the water for a moment, then told me everything. Dorian had not inherited money when Vivian supposedly died. He had stolen it. He had faked her death, placed her in the Caymans under a false name, and used the threat of total isolation, no family, no identity, no way home, to keep her cooperative. She had been signing his documents for years, but not freely. She was a prisoner without bars. She had helped him register the shell company because she had no other option. When she finished, her hands were trembling on the table. "He finds people who love someone," she said softly, "and uses that love like a leash." I reached across and covered her hands with mine. "Help me bring him down," I said quietly. "And I will take you home." Back in the laundromat basement, we moved fast. Felix kept the back channel active. With the punch cards from the greenhouse, I now had access to something Dorian didn't know existed, my father's kill switch. A command sequence built into the satellite's core architecture that could freeze any one of them completely. I selected the primary satellite, the one Dorian had staked his entire announcement on, and sent the encoded command. 6 minutes later, GPS signals across a wide zone flickered. Phones showed wrong locations. Navigation apps froze. It lasted 4 minutes. Enough. Felix monitored the internal Vanguard communications and watched panic spread in real time. Then something went wrong. A message appeared on Felix's screen. Someone inside the network had traced the signal back toward us. Not our exact location, but dangerously close. 20 minutes later, a van pulled up outside the laundromat. Nadia spotted it through the street-level window. "They're here." We grabbed the hard drives and the typewriter and left through the service exit into the alley. We were 1 block away when I heard van doors open behind us. We ran. But when I counted heads at the backup location, Felix pointed back the way we came. Zoe was not with us. My stomach dropped hard. Dorian called my phone at 11 that night. I had a new number, but he had Zoe's phone, and Zoe had called Petra earlier that day. He was smart and cruel in equal measure. His voice on the line was completely calm. I want the punch cards. Come to the Vanguard launch pad alone by morning. If you bring anyone, the girl suffers. I held the phone against my ear. I'll be there, I said. He hung up. I looked at the cards in my hand, then at Nadia and Felix. We have work to do tonight. What I didn't tell Dorian, Felix had already digitized every punch card the night before. The cards he would receive were real, but completely wiped, every command sequence erased. The data lived only on our encrypted drives. I also called Inspector Harlow Vane, a federal investigator who had once worked a case connected to Vanguard and owed my father a professional favor. I explained everything in 15 minutes. She agreed to position a surveillance vehicle near the launch pad. I put on the small wireless transmitter Nadia had built from second-hand parts and tucked it carefully beneath my collar. It wasn't perfect, but it would have to be enough. The Vanguard launch pad was a wide concrete platform surrounded by floodlights, on the northern edge of the company's private facility. When I arrived, Dorian stood with 2 large men I didn't recognize. Zoe sat on a metal crate, wrists tied, chin raised. I placed the wiped punch cards on the ground between us. Dorian picked them up without breaking eye contact. Then, because he had been waiting to say it to someone for a very long time, he told me everything. He described the poisoning, careful dosing of my father over 18 months. He explained the forged insurance contracts, the fake dossier evidence, the blackmail that forced 3 board members to vote his way. He spoke with pride, like a man reading from his own biography. What he did not know was that Harlow Vane was listening from a surveillance vehicle half a mile away. He also hadn't looked up at the large structure behind him. It was not carrying a satellite. It was carrying Vanguard's physical hard drives. Servers holding a decade of financial records. Dorian planned to launch them into orbit and burn the paper trail on re-entry, erasing every trace of his crimes in one clean launch. I pressed the small button on my watch, the one Felix had linked to a short-range signal connected to the launch pad's ignition system. The countdown froze at 0:01. The platform shuddered. Dorian spun toward the structure, then back to me. Then came the sound of vehicles on the access road. Headlights. Doors opening. But the officers who walked through the fence were not moving toward Dorian. One held out a badge and looked directly at me. "Lyra Thorne, you are under arrest for cyberterrorism." For 3 full seconds I couldn't understand what I was hearing. Dorian's mouth curved into a smile. He had filed the complaint that morning, fabricated technical logs linking me to the GPS glitch, before I had ever arrived at the launch pad. His counter move was already done before our meeting started. I looked at Zoe. One of Dorian's men cut her wrist ties and stepped back, pretending to be nobody. Dorian straightened his jacket and gave me a small, satisfied nod as I walked to the police vehicle. The wiped punch cards went into his coat pocket. He thought he had one. He had no idea the recording was already with Harlow Vane. The holding cell was cold and smelled like cleaning fluid. I sat on the metal bench and focused on breathing slowly. 2 hours in, I heard measured footsteps in the corridor. I knew that walk. Chairman Eldrick Voss appeared on the other side of the bars. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in days. "Enjoying yourself, Eldrick?" I said. He sat on the bench outside my cell, clasping his hands together. He wanted something. I waited. "Dorian has something on me," he said finally. "A gambling debt. Significant. He paid it off 2 years ago without telling me and kept the receipts." When the vote came, I had no real choice. I looked at him carefully. He does that, I said. He collects people's weaknesses and cashes them in when he needs to. Aldrich was quiet. Then he reached into his coat pocket and held a master keycard through the bars, one that opened every room in Vanguard Tower. He has blackmail on the entire board, Aldrich said. Every member knows now. None of them want to go down with his ship. I took the card. Get me out legally. Call Harlow Vane and tell her everything. Aldrich made the call. By morning, the arrest warrant was suspended pending a federal review. Inspector Harlow Vane's office formally filed the recording as evidence, opening a criminal investigation that superseded the cyberterrorism complaint. I was released at 7 with a paper cup of bad coffee. 6 hours later I walked back into the 90th floor boardroom. Same table. Same view. All board members present and pale. I placed a small speaker on the table and pressed play. Dorian's voice filled the room, every confession, the poisoning, the insurance scam, the blackmail, the forged evidence. The board sat in absolute silence. When it ended, the doors opened and Dorian walked in. He saw me. He saw the speaker. He saw the faces. And he laughed, sharp, with no warmth. He straightened his tie and sat at the far end of the table. This is dramatic, he said, but it doesn't matter. Under the company bylaws, I can only be removed if the entire board signs the removal order. He looked slowly around the table. And I own 3 of you. 3 board members looked at the floor. He was right. Without a unanimous vote, the bylaws kept him in place. He folded his hands and waited. I had read the Vanguard bylaws many times starting at 16 when my father first walked me through the founding documents. He believed I should understand every word of what I would one day inherit. That meant I had read something Dorian had not. I reached into my folder and pulled out a single-aged, slightly yellowed document. It was a clause written by my grandfather, Edmund Thorne, when he originally registered the company. I read it aloud slowly. In the event that Vanguard Industries is found to be directly involved in a criminal felony, all company ownership shall revert immediately to the youngest living blood Thorne. Dorian's expression did not change immediately. Then I watched the exact moment he thought he had found his answer. He leaned back and looked at Cassandra, who stood near the door. His eyes dropped to her stomach. My child is the youngest Thorne, he said calmly. Cassandra carries the name through our upcoming marriage. As the child's guardian, I control everything that child inherits. He folded his hands on the table pleasantly, like a man who had just played a winning card. He looked completely satisfied. Cassandra, I noticed very carefully, did not meet his eyes. I opened my folder and pulled out a second document, a medical file Vivian had given me in the Caymans, from the clinic that treated Dorian 3 years earlier. I placed it face up on the table and slid it slowly toward the center, the exact same way Dorian had once slid his fake dossier toward Aldrich Voss. This file is clear and fully documented, I said calmly. I paused. Dorian cannot father a child. The room went completely still. I watched the color leave his face for the first time since I had known him. His eyes moved immediately to Cassandra. She did not look at him. She looked at Aldrich Voss. And Aldrich stared at the floor. The truth arrived in that room the way cold air arrives when a window opens, all at once, impossible to ignore. The child Cassandra was carrying was not Dorian's. It was Aldrich's. For 30 seconds no one spoke. Then Aldrich stood and signed the removal order. He passed it along the table. One by one, 7 signatures. Even the 3 Dorians thought he owned, because now they had something far larger than his blackmail to fear. The filing would reach federal court by end of day. The vote was unanimous. I thought the immediate danger was over. I was wrong. That evening Felix called from the backup office at Petra's house. His voice was flat and careful, which meant he was frightened. Someone tried to access Nadia's terminal remotely, he said. Professional level. Military-grade tools. I told him to shut everything down and go somewhere public. Then I called Harlow Vane. She already knew. The cartel that had funded Dorian's money laundering through Vanguard for a decade had been watching the situation collapse. With Dorian losing control, they had a serious problem. They needed to erase their connection to Vanguard before the federal investigation found them. Harlow said they didn't want to touch Dorian, too visible. They wanted someone quieter. Someone who could make the clean energy patent actually work. The real one. Because the patent Dorian had sold them was incomplete. My father had designed it in two halves intentionally. The blueprints from the vault were deliberate decoys, left where someone greedy would find them. The cartel had paid hundreds of millions for something that did not work. They needed the other half. They needed me. An hour later, Harlow confirmed, a man had entered Vanguard Tower. He was not looking for Dorian. Harlow's team could not reach the building in time. I knew that the moment she told me. So I went myself, not toward the danger, but to my father's old laboratory on the 12th floor. He had kept it even after stepping back from daily operations. A quiet room of careful machines and the smell of solder. I used Aldrich's master keycard to get inside and moved quickly to the main workbench. The real blueprints were encoded in invisible ink on the typewriter's mechanical parts. My father had told no one. Not even me, until the trail of clues he left finally brought me here. I placed the typewriter before the scanning equipment, activated the UV light setting, and connected to the secure government upload channel Harlow had given me. The upload would take 11 minutes. At minute 4, I heard the stairwell door open. Then a fist against the laboratory door. Then Dorian's voice, raw, cracked, nothing smooth remaining. He had seen Aldrich's keycard used on the 12th floor from the building's access log. He knew what was here. Lyra. His voice filled the corridor. Open this door right now. I will burn this entire building down before I let you walk out with that patent. I did not open the door. I kept my eyes on the upload progress. Then the smoke alarm on the floor below triggered. I smelled chemical smoke through the ventilation. He had started something in the stairwell. The door buckled once, then again. When it split, Dorian came in holding a fire axe from the emergency case in the corridor. Breathing hard, jacket gone. He looked at the typewriter. That's mine, he said. The upload showed 83%. I stepped between him and the bench. He raised the axe handle. He wanted the typewriter intact. I caught his wrist and we struggled. I was not stronger. But I was faster, and I was angrier, and anger held quietly for 3 years is a remarkable and powerful thing. The sprinkler system kicked on and soaked everything. I grabbed the typewriter and moved to the window side of the room, keeping the bench between us. The upload hit 97%. Dorian lunged across the bench and got one hand on the typewriter frame. We held it between us like a rope in a tug of war, both completely drenched, smoke curling above the lights. His grip slipped on the wet metal. I pulled the typewriter to my chest and ran for the emergency stairwell. The roof access door was the last one before the fire suppression system locked all exits automatically. I pushed through it and came out into the warm night air. The city glittered far below. Every light a separate small life continuing without any awareness of what was happening up here. I had the typewriter under one arm and my phone in my other hand. Dorian came through the door 30 seconds after me, still holding the axe. Whatever composure had made him so dangerous, so charming and perfectly constructed, it was completely gone. He was simply a man who had built his life on what belonged to other people and could feel it all collapsing. We circled each other slowly in the dark. You were nothing before me, he said. Everything you built on my name. I built it on my father's name, I said. The one you took from me. He raised the axe. I pressed a button on my phone, the one Nadia had set up the previous day. Every camera in the building went live to the Vanguard Global Network simultaneously. The number in the corner climbed fast. 2.3 million watching. Dorian didn't know until he looked at my phone screen and saw himself broadcast to the world. He froze. 2 million people watching a man on a rooftop holding an axe over a woman holding a typewriter. He understood what it meant, every word from the launchpad, every piece of Harlow's evidence, every board signature. None of it would hit the public the way this single image was hitting them right now. He took one step back, then another. He was too rattled by the numbers on my screen to think clearly. His heel caught the raised edge of a drainage lip near the far side of the roof. His foot slipped, his arms went wide, and the axe clattered away. He grabbed the steel railing with both hands. His lower half swung out over the edge. I walked over and looked down at him. His eyes were wide and, for the first time since I had known him, completely unguarded. He was afraid. I thought of my father. Of his quiet Sunday mornings. Of 14 months of slow poison. I reached down with both hands and pulled Dorian back over the edge until he lay flat on the roof, breathing hard. "Death is too easy for you," I said. "I want you to watch me rebuild everything you broke." 6 months later, the courtroom was full. Not just with business press, though they filled the gallery. It was full because people had watched that livestream. 2.3 million viewers that night, and many millions more as the clip spread across the world. Dorian, Aldrich, and 5 other board members sat in orange jumpsuits. Weston Briggs was present in a decent suit, granted full immunity for his cooperation. Vivian sat near the front with the exhausted look of a woman who had finally set down something very heavy. I sat in the witness box for 4 hours and answered every question clearly. I had the recording. The financial files. Both medical reports. The digitized punch card data. The testimonies of Nadia, Felix, and Zoe. I had Vivian. I had the time-stamped government upload confirmation. It should have been more than enough. But near the end of the afternoon session, the defense attorney, a tall man named Carlyle who wore his competence like a second suit, placed a new document before the jury. Edmund Thorne was not a victim, he said carefully. He was the founder of the very shell company his daughter has been using as evidence. He paused. Edmund Thorne built the fraud. My client merely inherited it. The room went very quiet. My world shook. I sat with that for 3 days in the greenhouse, where the orchids were growing back. I turned every document over with fresh eyes. Slowly the truth came into focus. My father had built the shell company as a trap. A controlled structure to document and expose the cartel threatening Vanguard's research. He had been trying to catch them. Then Dorian found it first, poisoned him before the work was done, and took over the structure for his own use. The punch cards and typewriter contained not just the patent but documentation of the cartel's original approach to my father, the threats, the offers, the names. I brought it all to Harlow Vane on the 4th day. The charges against my father were dismissed. The case against Dorian expanded significantly. On the morning they restored the Thorne name, Thorne Aerospace, clean and new above the glass, I stood outside with Vivian and the team beside me. Inside the typewriter's paper feed I found one final punch card, in my father's handwriting. "I knew you'd fix my mistakes, Lyra. Now look at the stars. The second half of the patent is on the moon." I looked up. Far above the clouds, a light blinked once on the moon's surface. I smiled. The story was